What kind of man refuses a handshake in front of a room full of people, his eyes dripping with contempt, and expects the world to keep spinning in his favor? Marcus Langston, billionaire CEO of Langston Enterprises, stood at the head of the glass-walled boardroom, his tailored suit catching the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. His voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the murmurs of the gathered executives. "I don't shake hands with staff," he said, his gaze locked on Amara Cole, the only black woman in the room, her outstretched hand hanging in the air like an unanswered question. The room froze. Eyes darted between the two. Marcus, the untouchable titan of industry, and Amara, the quiet facilities manager who just walked in with a folder thicker than the tension, now choking the air. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Except Amara. Her lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile, and she lowered her hand, her eyes never leaving his. Amara had walked into Langston Enterprises 3 years ago. A temp worker with a degree in business administration she'd earned while working nights as a cleaner. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in this gleaming tower of wealth and power, not in a room with men and women who tossed around million-dollar deals like pocket change. But she was. Her promotion to facilities manager had come after months of relentless precision, streamlining operations, cutting costs, and making the company's sprawling headquarters run like a Swiss watch. She'd earned her place, not that Marcus Langston ever noticed. To him, she was invisible, a cog in the machine, until today. Today, she'd been summoned to present a report on the company's infrastructure overhaul, a project she'd spearheaded. And now, here she was, standing in the crosshairs of his arrogance. The boardroom, perched on the 60th floor of Langston's Manhattan headquarters, was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a restless city, gray clouds churning over skyscrapers as if mirroring the storm brewing inside. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his smirk daring anyone to challenge him. The other executives, 4 men and 2 women, all polished and pedigreed, shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking to Amara. She stood at the opposite end of the table, her navy blazer crisp, her braids pulled back in a low bun, her presence a quiet defiance. She opened her folder, her movements deliberate, and began to speak. Her voice was steady, each word landing like a stone in still water. The infrastructure overhaul saved Langston Enterprises $12 million this quarter, she said, sliding a stack of charts across the table. We've reduced energy costs by 18% and improved operational efficiency by 22%. Marcus didn't look at the charts. He didn't need to. His empire, built on real estate and tech acquisitions, was a juggernaut, and he didn't care for the minutiae of how it ran. He cared about power, about control, about the optics of being untouchable. "Impressive," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "For someone in your position." The word hung heavy, laced with something unspoken but unmistakable. Amara's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She'd heard that tone before, on buses, in stores, in every space where her skin made her a target for dismissal. But this wasn't a bus. This was her battleground. The meeting dragged on, Marcus peppering her with questions designed to trip her up. "And how exactly did you manage this without my approval?" he asked, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. Amara didn't hesitate. The board granted me discretionary authority for facilities decisions under $5 million, she said, her voice calm but unyielding. I stayed within budget and delivered ahead of schedule. A murmur rippled through the room. One executive, a wiry man named Paul, coughed into his hand, hiding a smirk. Marcus's face darkened. He wasn't used to being answered so directly, especially not by someone he'd just humiliated. Amara's report was flawless, her data undeniable, but Marcus wasn't listening. He was sizing her up, calculating how to reassert his dominance. As she finished, he stood, buttoning his suit jacket with a flourish. Noted, he said, dismissing her with a wave. You can go back to your duties. The room watched as Amara gathered her papers, her movements unhurried, her dignity intact. She walked out, the glass door closing behind her with a soft click. But the story didn't end there. It was only beginning. Back in her small office on the 12th floor, Amara sat at her desk. The hum of the building's HVAC system, a faint reminder of the machine she kept running. She opened her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. She'd spent years preparing for this moment, though she hadn't known it would come today. Her report wasn't just about cost savings. It was a key, a lever, a weapon. Tucked inside her folder was something else, something Marcus didn't know about, something that could shift the ground beneath his feet. She found it months ago, buried in the company's financial records, a thread she'd pulled until it unraveled into a truth so explosive it could bring the entire empire to its knees. Amara hadn't come to Langston Enterprises to play small. She'd grown up in a Brooklyn walk-up, her mother a nurse who worked double shifts, her father a mechanic who'd lost his job when the factory closed. She learned early that the world didn't hand out fairness. You had to carve it out yourself. And she had. Night school, spreadsheets, endless hours studying the inner workings of corporate giants like Langston. She'd clawed her way into this company, not for glory, but for purpose. And now, purpose was calling. She typed a single line into an email, addressed to a contact she'd cultivated over months, a reporter at the New York Times. I have something you need to see, she wrote, attaching a file labeled Langston Financials. Her finger lingered over the send button. She thought of Marcus's sneer, his words echoing in her mind. I don't shake hands with staff. She pressed send. The email vanished into the ether, and with it, the first domino fell. The next morning, the air in Langston Enterprises crackled with unease. Amara arrived at her office at 7 a.m. As always, her coffee steaming in a chipped mug she'd brought from home. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like the calm before a storm. She opened her laptop, her inbox already buzzing with messages. One stood out, unmarked, from an encrypted address. Meet me at 10. Rooftop. Come alone. Her pulse quickened. She knew who it was, Elena, the reporter she'd contacted. Amara had been careful, but not careful enough to avoid notice. Someone was watching. The rooftop of Langston's headquarters was a stark contrast to the boardroom's polished sterility. Wind whipped across the concrete expanse, tugging at Amara's blazer as she stepped out of the elevator. Elena was already there, a slight woman with sharp eyes and a notepad tucked under her arm. You're playing a dangerous game, Elena said, her voice low, almost lost in the wind. These documents, if they're real, could destroy him. Amara nodded, her throat tight. The file she'd sent contained evidence of Marcus's off-the-books deals. Payments funneled through shell companies to dodge taxes and inflate stock prices. Billions of dollars. Siphoned away, hidden from shareholders and the SEC. Amara had stumbled on it while auditing maintenance contracts, a discrepancy that led her down a rabbit hole of financial fraud. "I didn't ask for this," Amara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. "But I'm not backing down." Elena studied her, then handed her a USB drive. "Backup," she said. "If this goes public, you're a target. Protect yourself." Amara slipped the drive into her pocket, her mind racing. She hadn't expected it to escalate this fast. She'd thought she had time to plan, to strategize. But time was a luxury she no longer had. Back in her office, Amara's phone buzzed. A text from Paul, the smirking executive from a boardroom. "We need to talk." Now, her stomach twisted. Paul was Marcus's right-hand man, loyal to a fault, but something in his tone felt off. She met him in a quiet corner of the cafeteria, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Paul looked haggard, his tie loosened, his eyes darting. "You're stirring up trouble," he said, leaning in. "Marcus knows someone's digging. He's paranoid. Amara. He's got people watching everyone." She kept her face neutral, her heart pounding. "I'm just doing my job," she said. Paul laughed, a bitter sound. "Your job? You think he cares about your job? He's got plans to sell off half the company's assets, pocket the cash, and let the rest of us drown." That was the twist she hadn't seen coming. Marcus wasn't just hiding money. He was planning to gut Langston Enterprises, to strip it bare and walk away richer while thousands lost their jobs. Amara's mind reeled. She thought she was fighting a personal slight, a moment of arrogance. But this was bigger. This was betrayal on a scale she hadn't imagined. Paul leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "I'm not your enemy, Amara. But if you're going to do this, you need to move fast." He's already looking for a scapegoat. Amara spent the rest of the day in a haze, her mind piecing together the puzzle. The documents she'd sent Elena were only the beginning. If Marcus was planning a fire sale, she needed more emails, contracts, proof of intent. She worked late, her office lit only by the glow of her laptop. The building was empty, the silence oppressive. She hacked into the company's internal server, not with malice, but with the access codes she'd been given as facilities manager. She found what she needed, a trail of emails between Marcus and a private equity firm, outlining a deal to sell off Langston's core divisions for $2 billion. The emails were coded, vague, but damning. She copied them to the USB drive, her hands trembling. As she left the building, the city was alive with lights, but Amara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She was in too deep now, and there was no turning back. Marcus's world was built on secrets, but secrets had a way of breaking free. She thought of her mother, who'd taught her to stand tall no matter the odds. She thought of the workers who'd lose everything if Marcus's plan succeeded. She thought of that handshake, refused, and the fire it had lit inside her. The next day, the boardroom was a powder keg. Marcus called an emergency meeting, his face a mask of controlled fury. Amara wasn't invited, but she heard about it through whispers in the halls. He was accusing someone of leaking sensitive information, of sabotaging the company. Her name wasn't mentioned. Not yet, but she felt the news tightening. She met Elena again, this time in a crowded coffee shop far from the office. "It's happening," Elena said, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "We're running the story tomorrow. Front page. Are you ready for this?" Amara wasn't sure. Ready meant risking everything, her job, her safety, maybe more. But she nodded. "Do it," she said. The story broke at dawn. A headline screaming across the New York Times. Billionaires' secret deals. Langston Enterprises faces $2 billion fraud allegations. By 8 a.m., the news had spread like wildfire, trending on X, lighting up newsrooms, and flooding the inboxes of every major investor. Amara stood in her office, watching the chaos unfold on her phone. The stock market hadn't opened yet, but Langston's shares were already projected to plummet. Her inbox was a war zone, messages from colleagues. Some panicked, some furious, some begging for answers she couldn't give. She'd known this was coming, but the weight of it hit her like a tidal wave. Marcus was in his office, the door shut, the blinds drawn. Rumors swirled that he was on the phone with lawyers, with the board, with anyone who could stop the bleeding. Amara knew he'd come for her. She'd left enough breadcrumbs in the documents to point to herself, not enough to be obvious, but enough to make him suspect. She wanted him to know it was her. She wanted him to feel the ground shift. At noon, the summons came. A curt email from Marcus's assistant, CEO's office. Now, Amara walked the long hallway to the elevator, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The air felt thick, like the world was holding its breath. When she stepped into Marcus's office, he was alone, standing by the window, his back to her. The city stretched out below, a gray sprawl under a sky heavy with rain. He turned, his eyes cold, his voice quieter than she'd expected. "You think you're clever," he said. "Not question. You think you could take me down with a few emails and a newspaper article?" Amara stood tall, her hands clasped in front of her. "I didn't take you down, Mr. Langston. You did that yourself." His face twitched, a crack in his composure. He stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. "You're nobody. A glorified janitor. You think you can walk into my world and rewrite the rules." She didn't flinch. "Your world," she said, "is built on lies." I just turned on the light. The confrontation was electric, the air between them charged with years of unspoken resentment. Marcus's empire was teetering, and he knew it. The SEC was already sniffing around. Shareholders were in revolt, and the board was calling for an emergency meeting. But Marcus wasn't done. He leaned in, his voice a hiss. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." Amara met his gaze, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "You already made your mistake," she said. "You didn't shake my hand." She left his office, her legs trembling, but her resolve ironclad. The rest of the day was a blur, meetings canceled, phones ringing off the hook, reporters camped outside the building. Amara stayed in her office, the USB drive burning a hole in her pocket. She kept a copy of everything, a failsafe in case Marcus tried to bury the truth. But the truth was out now, and it was spreading faster than she'd imagined. By evening, the boardroom was a battlefield. The directors, a mix of old money and new ambition, were in full damage control mode. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his charm replaced by desperation. "This is a witch hunt," he said, his voice rising. "Someone's trying to sabotage me, and I'll find out who." Amara wasn't there. She hadn't been invited, but Paul slipped her a note during a break. "He's losing it," it read. "Be careful." That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She sat in her apartment. The city's hum a distant comfort. She thought of her mother, who'd always said, "The truth is heavy, but it's worth carrying." She thought of the workers who'd lose their jobs if Marcus's plan had gone through. She thought of the handshake, the moment that had set this all in motion. And then her phone rang. It was Elena. "They're coming for you," she said, her voice urgent. "Marcus's team found your digital footprint. They're building a case to pin this on you, say you fabricated the documents." Amara's heart sank. She'd been careful, but not invisible. She'd known there'd be a cost, but not this soon. The next morning, Amara walked into a trap. The boardroom was packed. Executives, lawyers, even a representative from the SEC. Marcus stood at the center, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "We've uncovered evidence," he said, his voice booming, "that Amara Cole, our facilities manager, has fabricated documents to smear this company and me personally." He held up a stack of papers, his eyes locking onto hers. "She's betrayed our trust, and she'll face the consequences." Amara stood at the back of the room, her heart racing but her face calm. She'd prepared for this. She'd known Marcus would strike back, and she'd known he'd play dirty. The room buzzed with whispers, eyes darting to her, some accusing, some uncertain. Paul was there, his expression unreadable. The SEC representative, a stern woman named Clara, stepped forward. "Ms. Cole," she said, "do you have anything to say?" Amara took a breath, her voice clear and steady. "I didn't fabricate anything. The documents are real, and they came from Langston's servers. I have proof, emails, contracts, financial records, all time-stamped and verifiable." She pulled the USB drive from her pocket, holding it up like a talisman. "This contains everything. Hand it over to the SEC, and they'll see the truth." The room erupted. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, his face red. "She's lying. She's a disgruntled employee with a vendetta." But Clara wasn't swayed. She took the USB drive, her expression unreadable, and promised a full investigation. Amara felt a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. Marcus's lawyers were already circling, ready to bury her in lawsuits, to paint her as a traitor. The days that followed were a blur of interrogations and headlines. Amara was suspended pending investigation, her access to the company's systems revoked. Reporters hounded her, camping outside her apartment, their cameras flashing like vultures circling a carcass. Social media was a war zone. Some called her a hero, others a liar. She stayed quiet, letting the evidence speak for itself. But the pressure was crushing. Friends distanced themselves, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Her mother called every night, her voice a lifeline. "You did the right thing," she said. "Hold your head up." Meanwhile, Marcus's empire began to crack. Shareholders pulled out. The stock plummeted 40%, and the board started turning on him. Rumors swirled that he was planning to flee the country, to hide in some offshore haven with his billions. Amara knew he wouldn't go quietly. He was too proud, too stubborn. And she was right. Late one night, her phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. It was Marcus, his voice slurred, angry. "You think you've won?" he said. "You're nothing. I'll ruin you." The threat hung in the air, chilling her to the bone. She saved the message, forwarded it to Elena, and added it to the growing file of evidence. Marcus was unraveling, and with every misstep, he was digging his own grave. The collapse came faster than anyone expected. The SEC's investigation, fueled by Amara's evidence, uncovered a web of fraud that stretched back years. Marcus's shell companies, his hidden accounts, his secret deals, they were all laid bare. The board ousted him in a late-night vote. His office cleared out by security before dawn. The headlines were merciless. Billionaires fall, Langston's fraud exposed. Photos of Marcus, once untouchable, now showed a man hollowed out, his eyes haunted as he left the building, reporters swarming. Amara watched it unfold from her apartment, the TV flickering with images of the man who'd sneered at her. She felt no triumph, only a heavy relief. The company was in chaos, but the workers, the ones Marcus had planned to betray, were safe, at least for now. The board had appointed an interim CEO, a woman named Linda, who'd been one of the few to nod approvingly during Amara's boardroom presentation. There was talk of restructuring, of rebuilding trust. Amara didn't know if she'd have a place in that future, but she'd done what she set out to do. The backlash against her was brutal. Marcus's legal team filed a defamation lawsuit, claiming she'd fabricated the entire scandal for personal gain. Anonymous accounts on X spread lies, calling her a fraud, a thief, a nobody trying to climb the ladder. But the truth was her shield. The USB drive, the emails, the financial records, they were airtight. Clara, the SEC representative, called her one evening. "You've done a public service," she said. "This could change how companies are held accountable." Amara's life became a paradox, celebrated by some, vilified by others. She received letters from strangers, workers who thanked her for saving their jobs, their livelihoods. One, from a janitor named Maria, brought tears to her eyes. "You showed them we're not invisible." But the threats didn't stop. She changed her locks, avoided her usual routes, lived with a constant hum of fear. Yet she refused to hide. She'd spent too long being unseen. One afternoon, Elena invited her to a small diner, a quiet place where they could talk. Over coffee, Elena slid a folder across the table. "You're not done yet," she said. Inside was an offer, a book deal, a chance to tell her story in her own words. Amara hesitated. She wasn't a writer, wasn't a public figure. But she thought of the handshake, of Marcus's sneer, of the fire it had sparked. "I'll think about it," she said, but she already knew her answer. Months later, Amara stood in a community center in Brooklyn, a microphone in her hand. The room was packed, local workers, students, activists, all there to hear her speak. She wasn't the facilities manager anymore, wasn't the whistleblower in the headlines. She was just Amara, a woman who'd stood up when it mattered. "I didn't do this for fame," she said, her voice steady, resonant. "I did it because the truth matters. Because we all deserve to be seen." The crowd erupted, their applause washing over her like a wave. She thought of her mother, watching from the front row, her eyes shining with pride. She thought of the workers who'd kept their jobs, the families who'd kept their homes. She thought of Marcus, now facing trial, his empire reduced to a cautionary tale. The lawsuit against her had been dropped, the evidence too overwhelming for his lawyers to fight. The book deal had turned into a bestseller, not because of the scandal, but because of what it stood for: courage, resilience, the power of one voice. Amara's life wasn't perfect. The threats still came, though they were fewer now. She'd taken a new job, consulting for a nonprofit that fought corporate corruption. It paid less, but it felt right. She was building something new, something that mattered. And she was learning to live with the weight of what she'd done, not just the victory, but the cost. That night, she walked home through the streets of Brooklyn, the city alive with possibility. The stars were faint, drowned out by city lights, but they were there. She thought of the handshake that had started it all, the moment that had pushed her to fight. It wasn't about Marcus. Not really. It was about her, about the woman she'd become. She'd pulled $2 billion worth of truth out of the shadows, not for revenge, but for justice. Amara's story spread beyond the headlines, beyond the book. It became a spark, a call to others to stand up, to speak out, to refuse to be invisible. She visited schools, spoke at conferences, met with workers who saw themselves in her fight. Each time, she told them the same thing: you don't need to be loud to be heard. You just need to be true. Her mother's words echoed in her own, a legacy of strength passed down through generations. Marcus's trial was a media circus, but Amara stayed away. She didn't need to see him fall to know she'd won. The company was rebuilding, slowly, under new leadership. Linda, the interim CEO, had reached out, offering Amara a role in the new Langston Enterprises. She declined, politely. Her path was elsewhere now, in places where she could make a difference without a glass-walled boardroom. One evening, as she sat in her apartment, a package arrived. It was small, unassuming, with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from Paul, the executive who'd warned her. "You changed everything," it read. "Thank you." Tucked inside was a photo of the old boardroom. Empty now, the glass table reflecting a sunset. On the blackboard in the corner, someone had written, "Pride falls, truth rises." Amara smiled, tucking the note away. It was a reminder, not of the fight, but what came after. She stepped on her balcony, the city stretching out before her. The weight of the past year was still there, but it was lighter now, carried by the knowledge that she'd done something real. She'd taken a moment, a refused handshake, a sneer, and turned it into a movement. The world wasn't perfect, but it was listening. And that was enough.